At 2 a.m., MIT's janitor's son fixed a formula that every PhD had given up on and got yelled at for touching the board. Snow fell softly over Cambridge that night. The campus of MIT glowed faintly under streetlights, every window lit like a small heartbeat refusing to sleep. Inside the basement of the Aeronautics and Astronautics building, the sound of a mop echoed through the corridor, slow and patient, as if the floor itself were breathing. The boy pushing the bucket was named Eli Morales. He was 17, small for his age, with dark hair and quiet eyes. The name on his badge said Raul Morales, his father. Raul was the real janitor, but arthritis had swollen his hands, and tonight he could not work. So Eli came instead. He said nothing about it to anyone. He simply took the keys, the gloves, and the old radio that always played too softly to drown his thoughts. His mother had died when he was 12. Since then, Eli had lived by small rules. Finish your task, leave no mess, and never draw attention. But he loved to look at the whiteboards in the labs. To him, they were constellations of chalk dust and thought, filled with symbols that hinted at secret languages of wind and motion. That night, the door to the fluid dynamics lab was left slightly open. Eli peeked inside. On a tall whiteboard stood a forest of equations and diagrams describing the flow of air through turbine blades. At the center, in large letters, someone had written the name of the problem the team had been struggling with for weeks. A model of airflow that kept failing to match real test results. He did not understand every symbol, but he could read the logic. The researchers had treated the air as if it stayed at one temperature all the way through the turbine. Eli remembered something he had once read at the public library. When air heats up, it becomes thinner and changes the way it moves. Its resistance, its stickiness, depends on temperature. Ignoring that fact could make every number wrong. He looked around. The room was empty, the computers asleep, the smell of coffee and metal still in the air. Eli set his mop aside. He picked up a small piece of chalk. His hands were clean, though they smelled faintly of soap. On the lower corner of the board, he wrote a short note in plain English. He suggested that the scientists consider how the change in temperature through the turbine could affect the thickness of the air. Then he added a smaller line. Be careful near the walls of the blades. That is where the flow decides whether to stay calm or to break into chaos. The chalk made a soft, scratching sound. Eli looked at what he had written. The words seemed too loud, too proud. He thought about erasing them, but his mother's voice came to him from memory. Learn, my son. Knowledge is freedom. He left the words there, put down the chalk, and quietly returned to his work. Morning came cold and blue. The first to enter the lab was Professor Harold Klein, a tall man with silver at his temples and a reputation for expecting precision. He noticed the note at once. Who touched my board? He said. It was not a question. His students froze. One of them tried to joke. Maybe the janitor solved the flow problem for us. Laughter flickered and died quickly. Klein was about to erase the words, then stopped. Something about the note made sense. The idea was simple but solid. He turned to his students. Let's try it, he said. Add the temperature change to the model. Refine the grid near the walls. Keep everything else the same. They ran the computer again. The machines hummed. Colors shifted on the screens, showing the air moving through the turbine. When the results appeared, the difference was clear. The predicted vibrations now matched the real data almost perfectly. What had been chaos was suddenly harmony. The room fell silent. Klein looked again at the small handwriting near the corner of the board. He felt the old, uneasy pride of a teacher who realizes he has just been taught something. Find out who was here last night, he said quietly. That evening, Eli returned for his shift. He opened the door to the lab. The lights were already on. Professor Klein was waiting with a cup of coffee in his hand. "Equations don't write themselves," he said. Eli froze, the mop handle tight in his grip. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I forgot to erase it. I didn't mean—" Klein raised a hand. "Why did you write that note?" Eli swallowed. "Because the air changes as it moves through the turbine. If we pretend it stays the same, the numbers lie. The part near the blades matters most. That's where the air decides whether to stay smooth or to turn wild." Klein watched him. "Who taught you that?" "No one," Eli said. "I read about it, and I built a small model at home with plastic tubes and a fan. You can see the air move if you add smoke. When it becomes unsteady, you feel it before you see it." Like when someone you love starts to cough and you know something's wrong even before the sound finishes? Klein nodded slowly. He was not used to hearing truth spoken without pride. "Last night," he said, "we tested your idea. It worked. You improved a problem that cost us months." He paused. "Why did you do it?" Eli looked down at his worn shoes. "Because I couldn't stand seeing something wrong that I knew how to fix," he said softly. "Even if I wasn't supposed to touch it. And because I believe knowledge shouldn't belong to one kind of people. It should belong to everyone who cares enough to learn." Klein set his cup down. Something in him, old and rigid, began to thaw. He remembered being a young man in Detroit, fixing machines beside his father, learning to listen to the tone of the drill before adding pressure. He saw in Eli the same quiet hunger. "Come back tomorrow," he said. "Not to mop, to learn. I want to hear you explain what you understand. If you can stand by what you wrote, then you have a place here." Eli nodded. "Yes, sir," he whispered. The next morning he came wearing a clean shirt and the shy hope of someone stepping into light after too many nights. Klein handed him pages of data, temperatures, pressures, speeds, and asked questions. Eli answered carefully. When he did not know, he admitted it. When he guessed, he said so. The professor liked that. Science, after all, begins with honesty. By noon, Klein gave him a visitor's badge. "Limited access," he said. "Work with one of my students. Observe. Learn. We'll see where this goes." That evening, Eli returned home. His father was waiting by the window, his hands folded. "How was today?" he asked in a mix of English and Spanish. Eli told him just enough to make him smile. "Your mother would be proud," Raoul said. "And so am I." Outside, snow began to fall again. In the lab, the whiteboard had been wiped clean, but if you looked closely, you could still see a faint trace of the note that had changed everything. And somewhere in the quiet of Building 41, a boy who cleaned floors dreamed not of fame, but of knowledge. Simple, clean, and shared like air. The next morning, the air over Cambridge carried the faint smell of melting snow and gasoline. The Charles River moved like gray silk under a sky of thin clouds. Inside Building 41, the hum of machines had already begun. Turbine tests, simulations, voices. MIT woke early. Eli arrived just before 8. He had never come to the campus in daylight except to drop off keys or buy cheap breakfast for his father. This time, he came not to clean, but to learn. His shirt was the same one he had ironed the night before, its collar a little too stiff. He carried no books, only a small notebook he had bought for $1 at a convenience store. His father had looked at him as he left and said, "Walk slow. People who rush forget to listen." Professor Harold Klein was already in the lab. He looked up from his desk and gave a small nod. You came, he said simply. Yes, sir, Eli replied. Klein gestured to a young woman standing beside the computer station. This is Priya Narayan, he said. She's one of my graduate students. You'll shadow her today. No touching the machines, just watch and ask. If you see something that doesn't make sense, say so. Curiosity is safer than silence. Priya smiled, not with pity, but with recognition. She had come to MIT from India 6 years ago, with 2 suitcases and the habit of working through the night. She remembered what it felt like to be the one with borrowed shoes and no credentials. Come on, she said. Let's see how the air behaves today. They went into the test bay, a large room lined with silver pipes and thick cables. In the center stood the turbine rig, a circular array of blades enclosed in metal, connected to sensors that recorded the smallest tremor. When it ran, the noise filled the lungs and made speech useless. But now it was quiet, waiting for power. Today, Priya said, we're checking a new design for cooling channels inside the blades. The airflow is supposed to stay stable. It never does. The math says it should. Reality laughs. Eli nodded. Because air is honest, he said softly. Priya looked at him. That's a strange way to put it. It never lies, Eli explained. It shows you exactly how wrong you are. She smiled again. You might survive here after all. They started the run. The turbine spun faster, rising from a hum to a roar. On the screen, graphs began to dance, lines showing temperature, pressure, vibration. Priya pointed at a jagged trace. There. That's the instability. It shouldn't be there. Eli leaned closer. The air from the exhaust vent brushed his face, warm and dry. How long has it been unstable? He asked. Since the start, she said. We've tried 3 designs. He studied the graphs. The vibration grows with speed, he said. Maybe the cooling air is too cold at the inlet. The walls might be shrinking faster than the core. That could make the air swirl unevenly. Priya frowned. That's actually possible, but how would you know that? Eli shrugged. When I fixed car engines with my father, we saw something like that. Metal and air argue when they heat at different speeds. She wrote down the idea, then stopped. Would you explain that to Professor Klein? Carefully. Use simple words. He likes simple words. They went back to the office. Klein listened, fingers steepled under his chin. Thermal expansion mismatch, he said, half to himself. We accounted for some of it, but perhaps not enough. He looked at Eli. You may be right. Let's add it to the test plan. Eli hesitated. Sir, I'm not sure I'm right. Klein nodded. Good. That means you understand science. For the rest of the day, Eli watched, asked, and wrote in his small notebook. The words inside were not elegant, but they were alive. The air changes its mind when it gets hot. Numbers are shy until you listen twice. The professor looks angry, but he is just thinking. At noon, Priya shared her sandwich with him. They sat near the loading dock where sunlight fell in a long, quiet strip. How did you learn all this? She asked. I didn't, Eli said. I just kept reading until something stopped being strange. Then I read more. Do you ever want to study here? She asked. Eli laughed softly. I don't even have a high school diploma yet. Then get one, she said. He shook his head. I can't. My father needs me to work. Priya looked at him for a long time. Sometimes, she said, the best way to help someone is to become what they believed you could be. That night, Eli returned home tired but light. His father was dozing in the chair. The television whispered the news. Eli sat on the floor and began rewriting his notes in careful handwriting. He wanted to remember every question, every mistake, every piece of advice. Knowledge, he thought, was not like money. It did not disappear when shared. Days passed. Eli kept coming back. Each morning he mopped the hall before sunrise, then joined the lab once the building opened. Priya taught him how to read data logs, how to tell if a measurement was clean or corrupted by noise. He learned about pressure ratios, blade geometry, and the thin region near the surface of the airfoil where everything was decided. Klein watched from a distance. At first he called the boy the visitor. Later he called him Morales. By the end of the second week, he called him Eli. One afternoon, Klein decided to test him. "We're running a new simulation," he said. "The data doesn't match our prediction. Tell me what you see." Eli stared at the graphs for a long time. "The air here moves too fast near the top of the blade," he said. "Maybe the angle is too sharp." Klein asked, "Why do you think that?" Eli pointed. "Because the flow loses its calm. It starts smooth, then shakes. The blade wants to talk too loudly to the air." Klein turned to Priya, almost amused. "He means the angle of attack is too high. He's not wrong." When the run finished, the result confirmed Eli's observation. The old professor leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "You have instincts," he said. "That's rare. Instinct and patience together. That's a scientist's heart." Eli said nothing. He was too proud to speak. That evening, Klein walked with him down the hallway. The air smelled of metal and floor polish. "You know," the professor said, "when I was your age, I worked in a factory. I used to clean machines before they became mine to fix. Sometimes the world forgets that talent doesn't wear a uniform." Eli looked at him. "Do you think I could ever study here?" Klein stopped. "That depends on whether you're willing to fail 100 times. "I already have," Eli said quietly. "Just not in school." Klein smiled for the first time. "Then you're halfway qualified." He promised to help Eli find a path, a night program, maybe a scholarship. Nothing certain, but enough to light a direction. When Eli got home that night, he told his father. Raoul listened, silent for a long time. "If this is the chance," he said finally, "you take it." "I can handle the nights." Eli's throat tightened. "But the rent—" "We'll manage," Raoul said. "Your mother didn't die so you could just survive." Outside, the snow had stopped. The street lights glowed against the wet pavement. Eli stood by the window and thought about air, about how it could be invisible and powerful at the same time. He realized he wanted his life to be like that. Quiet, unseen, but full of force. Back at MIT, in the dark of Building 41, Professor Klein erased the last of the old equations from the board. He kept the boy's note on a small piece of paper in his drawer. He did not tell anyone why. Sometimes, when the lab fell silent, he took it out and read it again. It reminded him that genius can wear work boots and carry a mop, and that the difference between cleaning a floor and cleaning a formula is smaller than most people think. The third week came with a shy spring wind. Snow melted into narrow streams along the sidewalks of Cambridge. The air smelled of thawed earth and coffee grounds. MIT grew louder again, students rushing between buildings, professors talking mid-stride, the clatter of bicycles against railings. Inside Building 41, Eli now walked the halls with a badge clipped to his shirt. It said, "Visitor, Research Access." It still felt strange against his chest. He would touch it sometimes, not in pride, but to be sure it was real. Professor Klein had arranged for Eli to attend the team's weekly review meeting. The topic was the turbine project, the same one whose error Eli had once corrected in secret. This time, Klein wanted him there openly. "You won't have to present," the professor said that morning. "Just listen, take notes. And if someone asks your opinion, give it. Speak clearly. Simplicity earns respect. Eli nodded. Yes, sir. He spent the hours before the meeting helping Priya calibrate sensors. They worked in comfortable silence, interrupted only by the hiss of compressed air. She could tell he was nervous. Don't try to sound clever, she said. People here have already heard clever. Try to sound honest. He smiled faintly. Honest is easier. At 2 p.m, the conference room filled. A dozen people sat around the long table, graduate students, postdocs, engineers from a sponsoring company. Laptops glowed like a row of small campfires. At the head of the table sat Klein, his hands folded, his expression unreadable. Eli stood quietly against the back wall, notebook in hand. He recognized one of the senior students, Daniel Mercer, tall, confident, known for winning every argument. Daniel's eyes flicked toward Eli, then back to the screen. A small smirk formed and disappeared. The meeting began with updates, data plots, temperature profiles, lines of code. Numbers rolled across the projector screen. For an hour, Eli listened to the rhythm of professional certainty. Words like validation, convergence, sensitivity, residuals, spoken with the fluency of those who had never had to mop a floor to buy dinner. Then Daniel cleared his throat. Professor, he said, before we move on, I want to address the viscosity correction we adopted last month. It improved some results, yes, but it's still based on an undocumented suggestion. We don't know who wrote it or why. Klein's eyes moved toward the back of the room. We do now, he said. Mr. Morales wrote it. A small stir went around the table. Daniel turned, eyebrows raised. The janitor's son, he said, before realizing the room had gone silent. I mean, our visitor. Klein's voice stayed calm. Yes, our visitor. Daniel hesitated. With respect, sir, research here should be traceable. Ideas must be tested and proven, not improvised. Priya started to speak, but Klein lifted a hand. Let him continue. Daniel pressed on. The improvement could be coincidence. We cannot base design choices on unverified input, and frankly, it sends the wrong message. We trained for years to earn a place at this table. Klein leaned back. And yet, he said quietly, the correction worked. Daniel flushed. Once, maybe. Science isn't luck. Eli's hand tightened around his notebook. He could feel his heartbeat in his fingertips. Klein looked at him. Would you like to answer, Mr. Morales? Eli hesitated. His mouth was dry. Every face turned toward him, expectant, half curious, half skeptical. He took a breath the way he used to before diving into cold water. I didn't mean to change anyone's work, he began. I only saw something that didn't match what I'd read about how air behaves. I wrote it down because it felt wrong to stay quiet. I didn't know it would matter. He looked around the table. No one spoke. I understand that I'm not trained like you, he went on. But I've learned that ideas don't ask where you come from before they arrive. They just arrive. The rest of us have to decide what to do with them. Priya's eyes shone proud, but restrained. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Klein broke the silence. A fair point. Mr. Morales, can you explain, without equations, why that correction changed our results? Eli nodded. He moved closer to the screen. His voice steadied as he spoke. When air moves through the turbine, it heats up, he said. Hot air is thinner and moves differently. The old model treated it all as one temperature, so the computer thought the air was calmer than it really was. The new model lets the air change its mood as it warms. That made the prediction honest again. Someone chuckled softly at the phrase. Even Daniel's mouth twitched. Klein looked satisfied. "Honest air," he said. "I like that." When the meeting ended, most people filed out quickly, already speaking of deadlines. Daniel lingered, then approached Eli. "You talk pretty well for a janitor," he said, half smiling but not kindly. Eli looked at him. "And you argue well for someone afraid to be wrong." Daniel blinked. The words were soft, not sharp, but they landed. He turned away without replying. Outside, the afternoon light flooded the hallway. Priya caught up with Eli. "You handled that perfectly," she said. "You didn't fight, you just told the truth." "I was scared," Eli admitted. "Good," she said. "Fear keeps you honest." That evening, Professor Klein found Eli sitting alone in the lab, sketching shapes of turbine blades in his notebook. "You held your ground," Klein said. "That matters." "I wasn't trying to," Eli said. "I just didn't want them to think I was pretending to be something I'm not." Klein sat beside him. "Pretending is when you claim more than you know. You only spoke what you understood. That's the beginning of real scholarship." He paused, watching the boy draw. "Next week, there's a presentation to our industrial partners. Priya will show the results. I want you to assist her. You'll be on stage, officially." Eli froze. "Sir, I can't. I'm not—" "You can," Klein interrupted. "You've earned that much." The professor stood, leaving the room as quietly as he had entered. The decision was final. Eli sat there for a long time. The hum of the lights, the faint smell of oil, the distant wind outside. It all felt larger than he could hold. He closed his notebook and whispered to himself, "Mom, if you can see this, I'm still cleaning floors, just different ones." That night, at home, Raoul listened as Eli told him everything. The father smiled, his eyes wet and proud. "People like us," Raoul said. "We don't get many doors. But when one opens, you stand in it with your back straight." "I will," Eli said. The old man nodded. "And remember, if they shout, it means they heard you." Eli went to bed late. The city hummed like a faraway engine. He lay awake thinking not of applause or pride, but of air. Honest, invisible, moving through everything. He dreamed of the turbine, quiet and steady now, its blades turning like pages in a book he had finally learned how to read. The day of the presentation arrived with clear skies and sharp wind. Cambridge in early spring always smelled of both renewal and anxiety. The Charles River was half ice, half silver, like a mirror not sure what season it belonged to. Eli woke before sunrise. His father was already up, sitting at the kitchen table, tying old work boots even though he had nowhere to go. "Big day?" Raoul asked, eyes kind but cautious. "Professor Klein wants me to help with the presentation," Eli said, pouring coffee into 2 chipped mugs. Raoul smiled. "You'll do fine. Speak slow. People listen better when you leave silence between words." Eli nodded. "I'm more afraid of the silence than the words." "Then fill it with honesty," his father said. "It's the only thing they can't argue with." They shared the quiet for a while, 2 hands warming around the same pot of coffee. When Eli left, Raoul followed him to the door and placed a folded paper in his coat pocket. "Your mother wrote this long ago," he said. "She wanted you to keep it for the day you stopped being afraid." Eli didn't open it. He promised he would read it later. The auditorium at MIT was bright with polished wood and stainless steel. Rows of chairs curved around the stage like patient ears. Engineers from the sponsoring company sat in the front, notebooks open, ties tight. Professors whispered to one another about funding and deadlines. Priya stood at the podium, organizing slides. Eli helped her connect cables, checking that the projector worked. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice stayed steady. Professor Klein entered last, moving with deliberate calm. He greeted the guests, shook hands, and spoke quietly to Eli. "When you go on stage, remember this," he said. "You are not there to impress them. You are there to remind them what truth looks like." Eli nodded. He wanted to believe that. The lights dimmed. The first slides appeared. Graphs, photographs of the turbine rig, lines of data. Priya began with practiced clarity, explaining the project's goal, to improve the efficiency and stability of small-scale turbines used for research and aerospace applications. Her voice was confident, professional. She described how their models had failed to match test results until a simple correction brought theory and reality into alignment. Then she paused. "That insight," she said, "came from someone who sees this laboratory differently than we do. He is not a student here, not yet, but he understands something fundamental about air and honesty. Eli, would you join me?" A murmur swept through the audience. Eli stepped onto the stage. The bright light felt like sunlight in his eyes. He could sense every breath, every heartbeat. "Good afternoon," he said softly. "I used to clean the floors of this building at night. That gave me time to look at the boards. One night I saw something I didn't understand, so I asked myself why. That question changed everything." A few faces softened. Others stayed skeptical. He explained what he had noticed, the difference between what the model assumed and what the real turbine showed. He spoke slowly, without jargon, using words that even those outside engineering could follow. "Air changes when it gets warm," he said. "It becomes thinner and faster, and if we forget that, the math starts to lie. Once we let the air change in our model, the results began to tell the truth again." The room stayed quiet, not in disbelief but in thought. Then one of the company engineers, a man with a clean suit and gray hair, raised his hand. "Mr. Morales," he said, "if air can't be trusted to behave simply, why do you trust a simple correction? Isn't science supposed to be exact?" The question hung in the air like a test. Eli took a slow breath. "Science isn't exact," he said. "It's honest. It tells you how close you are to being wrong. The correction isn't perfect, but it's more honest than pretending nothing changes." A low ripple of laughter moved through the room, not mocking, but approving. The engineer smiled, surprised. Professor Klein watched from the side of the stage, his face unreadable except for the small twitch of pride in his jaw. Eli continued, describing how the change had improved the prediction of vibration frequencies and reduced error. He didn't use numbers. He told the story of the turbine as if it were alive, an engine that had been misunderstood until someone listened to its breathing properly. When the presentation ended, the applause came slowly, then grew into a long, steady sound. Priya bowed lightly. Eli stood still, unsure what to do. Klein stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Morales," he said to the audience, "has reminded us all of something important, that humility is as valuable as intelligence." Afterward, the visitors came to shake hands. Some asked questions. Others offered polite congratulations. Eli felt dizzy from all the faces. He slipped out into the hallway to breathe. Priya found him there. "You did it," she said. "I just talked," he replied. "The air did the rest." She laughed. "You realize they're going to remember that line. I hope they remember the idea, not me." "Sometimes," she said, "you can't separate the two." Later that evening, the lab was quiet again. Klein sat at his desk, reading emails from the sponsors. They wanted to extend the collaboration, to fund more testing. He closed his laptop and looked up to see Eli standing in the doorway. "Come in," he said. Eli hesitated. "Thank you for letting me speak," he said. I didn't let you, Klein replied. You earned it. Eli smiled faintly. I still don't belong here. The professor leaned back. Belonging isn't given by the door you walk through. It's earned by what you bring when you arrive. You brought truth. That's rare. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thin folder. I made some calls. There's a scholarship fund for local residents who show scientific promise. You'll need to finish your high school certificate first, but if you do, I'll help you apply. Eli's throat tightened. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Klein said. Then work harder than you think you can. Eli nodded, eyes bright. Yes, sir. Klein's voice softened. You remind me of why I became a teacher. That night, Eli returned home later than usual. The apartment smelled of garlic and old wood. His father was asleep in the chair. Eli sat beside him and finally unfolded the paper his mother had written years before. The ink had faded, but the words were clear. When the world forgets to see you, don't forget to see yourself. Work quietly. Learn loudly. Forgive faster than others deserve. One day, the floor you clean will reflect the sky. Eli pressed the paper to his chest. Outside, the city lights shimmered like distant turbines turning through the night. He closed his eyes and whispered, I'm trying, Mom. In the silence that followed, the wind brushed the window like a soft broom across glass, and Eli felt, for the first time, that he was no longer sweeping someone else's dream. He was building his own. Spring in Cambridge softened the air. The river thawed fully, and the willows along Memorial Drive began to move again. For the first time since winter, the city smelled faintly of grass instead of iron. Eli Morales walked to Building 41 with a strange mix of excitement and guilt. In his coat pocket he carried 2 letters, one from Professor Klein, confirming the scholarship nomination, and another from the local community school, reminding him that he still had to finish his high school equivalency exams. One letter pulled him forward, the other held him back. Inside the lab, the machines slept in the corner, their silver skins catching sunlight. Priya was already there, measuring samples for a new test. She looked up when Eli entered. Morning, she said. You look like someone who hasn't decided whether to celebrate or cry. He smiled weakly. Both sound right. She set down her pen. Klein told me. Congratulations. Eli lowered his eyes. It's not real yet. I still need to pass those exams. And there's my father. Priya nodded. He'll want you to go. He says that, Eli replied. But I see the pain in his hands. If I leave, he'll be working nights again. They stood in silence for a moment. The lab smelled faintly of oil and detergent, a scent Eli had grown to love. It reminded him of every night he had spent there when no one knew his name. Priya said softly, You can't live 2 lives forever. One of them will ask for all of you. That afternoon, Klein called him into his office. The professor's desk was as neat as always, only a cup of cold coffee betraying how long he had been there. I've arranged for you to take your equivalency tests next month, he said. After that, the scholarship committee will review your application. Eli nodded but did not look happy. What's wrong? Klein asked. It feels wrong to leave my father, Eli said. He depends on my shifts. We barely pay the rent. Klein leaned back. Your father depends on you now, yes, but he also depends on you becoming more than the floor he mops. Don't take that from him. Eli's voice broke. He'll be alone. Alone isn't the same as abandoned, Klein said gently. Sometimes love means leaving for a while so you can return with something greater to give. The professor's tone softened further. When I was 19, my father wanted me to take over his factory job. I left instead. For years I thought I'd betrayed him. Then one day he wrote me a letter that said, I built machines so you could build dreams. I think your father understands that better than you think. Eli didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded. That evening he went home early. Raoul was in the kitchen, humming softly to the radio, cleaning a pot that had already been cleaned for 10 minutes. "Pop," Eli said, "they want me to take those exams. If I pass, I could study here. For real." Raoul looked up, eyes bright under tired lids. "That's good news." "It means I might have to leave for a while." Raoul dried his hands on a towel. "I know. You're not angry?" "Angry?" The man laughed quietly. "Son, I scrubbed floors for 20 years so you wouldn't have to. If leaving this apartment means you'll never hold a mop again, then go. The house will be quieter, yes, but quiet isn't bad. It lets me talk to your mother." Eli's chest tightened. "She'd tell me to stay." Raoul shook his head. "No. She'd tell you to go and write her name somewhere big." They both laughed, and for a moment the room felt like before. The warmth, the smell of beans on the stove, the unspoken faith that everything hard had a purpose. Over the next few weeks, Eli balanced both worlds. In the mornings he studied for the exams, memorizing formulas and grammar rules at the library. In the afternoons he worked at the lab, helping Priya record data and maintain equipment. At night, he took extra cleaning shifts to keep his father's job secure. The days blurred into each other. Coffee, chalk dust, bus rides, fatigue. Yet beneath the exhaustion grew something bright, the belief that his life could change through effort, not luck. One night, after everyone had left, he sat alone in the lab. The turbine's metal gleamed under the dim emergency lights. He whispered to it like an old friend. "You and I both came from the wrong place," he said. "But look at us now." He smiled and picked up the broom. He still cleaned the floor before leaving, out of habit, as if polishing a promise. Exam day came gray and cold. Eli sat in a wide classroom filled with strangers. The test papers smelled of ink and new paper. Questions about physics, math, and writing stared back at him. He remembered Klein's advice, "Slow is smooth, smooth is fast," and wrote carefully. Each page felt like another small wall between where he was and where he wanted to be. When it was over, he walked out into the cold air, exhausted but free. The sky was a soft blue. He thought of his mother's letter. "The floor you clean will reflect the sky." He hoped she was right. A week later, an envelope arrived. Raoul waited until Eli came home to open it. The letter was short. Eli read the first line twice before the words settled in. He had passed. Raoul laughed, loud and pure, then pulled his son into a rough hug. "I knew it," he said. "Your mother's watching." Eli felt tears rise, warm and unstoppable. "Pop, what if I can't keep up? What if I'm not ready?" "You were ready the moment you picked up that chalk," Raoul said. "You just didn't know it." That night, they celebrated with soup, candles, and an old record of Spanish songs. It was all they could afford, but it felt like more than enough. 2 days later, Klein called Eli to his office again. "The scholarship is confirmed," he said. "You'll start summer preparatory classes in June. Housing and tuition are covered." Eli stared at the letter in disbelief. "Covered? All of it?" Klein smiled. "All of it." For a long moment, Eli said nothing. Then, quietly, "How do I thank you?" Klein shook his head. "Don't thank me. Finish what you start. Then find someone who needs a door opened and open it for them. That's how you thank me." Eli's eyes glistened. "I will." The professor placed a hand on his shoulder. "Go tell your father." That evening, the two Morales men stood on the small balcony of their apartment, looking out over the city. The lights of Cambridge blinked like stars caught in glass. Raoul leaned on the railing. "You'll go far," he said. "I'll come back," Eli promised. Raoul smiled. "Good, but don't come back too soon." They both laughed softly. Below them, the streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, tiny mirrors of the life they had built together. For the first time in years, Raoul's hands didn't shake. And for the first time, Eli let himself imagine a future that didn't end with sunrise and a mop bucket. That night, Eli packed a small bag. Inside, he placed 3 things: his mother's letter, his notebook from the lab, and the old work badge that still read Raoul Morales. He looked around the small room one last time, then whispered, "Thank you. Home. I'll be back." Outside, the wind carried the scent of the river. It was the same wind that once rushed through the turbine he had helped to understand. It sounded almost like applause, quiet, steady, and real. Summer in Cambridge came softly that year. The air was heavy with the smell of cut grass and river mist. For the first time, Eli Morales walked across the campus of MIT not as a janitor's son carrying cleaning supplies, but as a student carrying books. His scholarship covered tuition, housing, and meals, but not the strangeness of belonging to 2 worlds at once. Every brick of the buildings he had once mopped seemed to watch him now. He felt both invisible and exposed, as if the walls remembered what he used to be. He moved into a small dorm room with white walls and a narrow window facing the Charles River. The bed creaked, the desk wobbled, and the air smelled faintly of paint, but to Eli, it felt like a cathedral. He placed 3 things on the shelf: his mother's letter, his notebook, and his father's old work badge. That first night, he could not sleep. From his window, he could see the faint glow of Building 41 across the courtyard. Somewhere inside, machines hummed, and he imagined Professor Klein working late, surrounded by chalk dust and silence. He whispered to himself, "I made it, Mom. But I still have to deserve it." Classes began early the next morning. The schedule was heavier than anything he had known. Calculus, physics, material science, and an introductory course in computational modeling. Each class moved like a fast train, no pauses, no mercy. On the first day, he arrived 10 minutes early and still found the lecture hall almost full. The students around him spoke in quick sentences about internships, research, and family vacations abroad. Their laptops glowed like windows into worlds he did not know. When the professor entered, the room fell silent. "Welcome to the beginning of your real education," she said. "Here, you learn not what to think, but how to be wrong and start again." Eli liked that sentence. It sounded like home. He took notes by hand, filling his notebook with neat, careful lines. When the class ended, he stayed behind to ask a question. The professor looked at him, recognizing neither his name nor his history. "Good question," she said. "You should consider joining our study group." "You think like a builder, not a tourist." It was the first kind thing anyone had said to him that week. Still, life as a student was not easy. Some classmates treated him with quiet curiosity, others with condescension. One afternoon in the cafeteria, he sat alone at a corner table reviewing his notes. A tall student with a neat haircut, Daniel Mercer from the Turbine Project, walked by and stopped. "So it's true," Daniel said. "You're actually enrolled now." Eli looked up. "I am." Daniel smiled without warmth. "Don't take this the wrong way, Morales, but cleaning floors and solving equations are different skills." Eli's eyes stayed calm. "You're right, but they both require patience." Daniel blinked. "You think that's enough?" "No," Eli said, "but it's a start." Daniel shook his head and walked away. but the faintest trace of respect flickered behind his smirk. Weeks passed. Eli spent long nights in the library, reading until his eyes blurred. Sometimes he would fall asleep over his notes, dreaming of turbines turning quietly in the dark. Priya visited often, checking in on him like an older sister. She had graduated now, but still worked with Klein. One evening, she brought takeout food and sat with him on the dorm steps. "Do you miss home?" she asked. "Every day," Eli said, "but I think missing something means you're still grateful for it." Priya smiled. "That's a good way to see it. Professor Klein says you remind him of his younger self." "That must mean I'm stubborn," Eli said. "Worse," she replied. "You're hopeful." They laughed, and for a while the night didn't feel so heavy. Midterms came like a storm. Equations, essays, and practical exams piled on top of each other. Eli studied until dawn, fueled by coffee and determination. On the day of his hardest exam, computational modeling, his hands trembled. He took a deep breath and remembered his father's words. "Fill the silence with honesty." He answered every question slowly, carefully, never guessing. When the grades came out, he stared at the screen in disbelief. He had passed them all, not perfect, but solid. Enough to stay, enough to continue. That evening, he called home. Raul answered after the third ring. "Pop," Eli said, "I passed." Raul laughed so loud that Eli had to hold the phone away from his ear. "I told you! You see? The floor reflects the sky." Eli laughed too. "It's still a little dusty, but it's getting there." Raul's voice softened. "I'm proud of you, son. Your mother would be, too." After the call, Eli sat by the window looking at the lights of the city. He felt a warmth rise in him that had nothing to do with grades. It was the warmth of belonging, not because someone had let him in, but because he had earned his place. A week later, Professor Klein called him to the lab. The old man was standing by the turbine rig again, hands clasped behind his back. "You're surviving," he said. "Trying," Eli answered. Klein nodded. "Good. I want you to help us with a new project, one involving renewable energy, a smaller turbine for rural areas. I think you'll understand the people we're designing it for." Eli's heart lifted. "For places like where I grew up?" "Exactly," Klein said. "The world needs engineers who remember the dust under their shoes." Eli smiled. "Then I'm your man." Klein's eyes softened. "You always were." That night, back in his dorm, Eli wrote a letter to his father. It was simple and short. "Pop, classes are hard, but I'm learning. The professors are strict but fair. I'm helping design a turbine that could bring light to towns like ours. I think that's what Mom would have wanted. I'll visit soon. Love, Eli." He sealed the letter, then opened his window. The night air brushed against his face. He could hear the faint hum of the turbines across the river, turning slowly, endlessly. For the first time, he understood something that no classroom could teach. Genius was not about answers. It was about endurance, the courage to stay curious when life tried to make you small. He closed the window and turned off the light. The campus fell quiet, except for the whisper of wind moving through the old buildings. Somewhere, between the floor he once cleaned and the sky he was reaching for, Eli Morales finally felt at home. Autumn arrived quietly in Cambridge. The trees along Massachusetts Avenue turned copper and gold, and the sidewalks filled with the crunch of fallen leaves. The air carried that familiar scent of chalk dust, rain, and something else: expectation. Eli Morales was now halfway through his first year. The rhythm of lectures, labs, and late nights had settled into his bones. He walked differently, shoulders a little straighter, eyes a little more certain. But inside, he still felt like the boy who once mopped these floors. The new project that Professor Klein had promised was beginning. Its goal? To design a small wind turbine that could generate power in rural areas, farms, small villages, forgotten corners where the grid never reached. It was the kind of work Eli dreamed of, something useful, something that could touch lives like the one he came from. One evening, Klein gathered the team in the lab. Priya, now a teaching assistant, 2 graduate students, and Eli. On the board behind him were hand-drawn sketches of turbine blades. "Our challenge," the professor said, "is efficiency. We need a design that works with low, unpredictable winds. If we succeed, we could bring light to places that have only known darkness." He turned to Eli. "You grew up around people who fixed things with what they had. That perspective matters here." Eli nodded, nervous but proud. "We used to build water pumps out of car parts," he said. "They worked, just not for long." Klein smiled. "Then maybe we'll build something that lasts longer." For weeks, Eli threw himself into the project. He studied the aerodynamics of small blades, the way wind behaves when it's weak or irregular. He stayed up late sketching ideas, shapes inspired by the wings of birds, the curve of corn leaves back home, even the spin of his father's old ceiling fan. But invention is a patient thief. It takes time, and often pride. One Friday evening, the team gathered to test Eli's first design, a small prototype built from lightweight plastic and aluminum. It looked fragile, almost like a toy, but the shape was elegant, promising. Klein gave a nod. "Start the wind tunnel." The machine roared to life. Air rushed through the tunnel, a white noise that filled the lab. The blades began to turn, slowly, then faster. For a brief moment, Eli's heart lifted. The data on the screen started to move. Then, without warning, one blade snapped. The turbine shuddered, rattled, and stopped. A sharp metallic sound echoed through the room. The silence afterward was worse than the noise. Priya reached over and shut off the tunnel. A piece of the broken blade rolled across the floor, tapping against Eli's shoe. Klein looked at the data, then at the boy. "What do you think happened?" Eli swallowed hard. "The material wasn't strong enough," he said quietly. "I tested it, but maybe not at the right wind speed." "Maybe," Klein said. "Or maybe the design trapped more turbulence than you expected." Eli nodded, shame creeping up his neck. "I'll fix it." Klein's voice softened. "You will, but not tonight. Go home, rest. We learn more from what breaks than what works." That night, Eli couldn't sleep. The sound of the snapping blade replayed in his head like a cruel melody. He felt the old fear again, that he didn't belong, that he was just a visitor pretending to be a student. At midnight, he walked back to the lab. The doors were locked, but his card still worked. Inside, the turbine sat wounded under the fluorescent lights. Eli ran his fingers over the broken edge of the blade. It felt like failure, but also like truth, sharp, honest, and real. He pulled out his notebook and began sketching again. He noticed how the blade had bent before it broke. He remembered the words of his father. "When something fails, don't fix the crack. Fix what caused it." By dawn, the pages were filled with new drawings, thicker roots, gentler curves, a blade that could twist slightly with the wind instead of fighting it. When Klein arrived that morning, he found Eli asleep at the desk, his head resting on the notebook. The professor smiled faintly. He set a cup of coffee beside him and looked at the sketches. "They're good," he said softly. "Better than before." Eli woke with a start. "I couldn't leave it alone." "I know," Klein said. That's what makes you one of us. They built the new prototype together over the next week. This time, the blades were reinforced with flexible carbon strips that could bend slightly under stress. When they tested it again, the turbine spun steady and smooth, humming like a quiet song. Priya clapped her hands. "It's holding!" Eli watched the screen, hardly breathing. The output voltage climbed higher, the efficiency line stable. He didn't smile. He simply closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the turbine wash through him like forgiveness. Klein looked at him. "Congratulations," he said. "Your first failure just gave birth to your first success." Later that evening, after the others left, Eli stayed to clean the workbench. Old habits die slowly. As he wiped the surface, Klein walked back in. "You don't have to do that anymore," the professor said gently. "I know," Eli replied, still wiping, "but it reminds me where I came from." Klein nodded. "Then keep doing it. But remember, you don't have to stay there." Eli set the cloth down. "Do you think it'll really help people? The turbine?" "I think it already has," Klein said. "It helped you. And maybe that's where change begins." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the turbine filling the room like the heartbeat of a second chance. That night, Eli walked back to his dorm through streets covered in fallen leaves. The wind pushed gently at his back. For the first time, he realized that wind was both destroyer and teacher. It could break a blade or lift a dream. He whispered into the cold air, "Thank you for both." When he reached his room, he sat by the window and wrote a single line in his notebook. "Failure is just air testing the strength of what you believe." He closed the book and looked out at the lights across the river. Somewhere in Building 41, a turbine turned, slow, patient, unstoppable. And for the first time, Eli felt that the wind no longer belonged only to the rich or the educated. It belonged to everyone who dared to face it. Winter came early that year. The first snow fell before Thanksgiving, and Cambridge turned white again. The Charles River froze at its edges, and the city lights trembled on the ice like scattered coins. Inside Building 41, the new wind turbine prototype stood proudly in the test bay. Its small blades spun gracefully even under weak wind. The data was clear. Higher efficiency, lower cost, and a design simple enough for communities with limited resources to build on their own. For Eli Morales, it was more than a machine. It was proof that his mother's words were true. One day, the floor you clean will reflect the sky. Professor Klein submitted a report about the project to the department board and the company that funded it. Within a week, emails began arriving. Engineers wanted to see the design. Professors from other labs asked questions. The idea spread faster than Eli expected. One morning, Priya entered the lab with a grin. "You're in the papers," she said, waving her phone. MIT's newsletter called it a low-cost solution for a global problem. Eli blinked. "They used my name?" "Yours and Professor Klein's," she said. "You're listed as co-designer." He felt something unfamiliar, pride mixed with fear. "People will think I don't deserve it." Priya smiled softly. "That's because you still think you don't." But not everyone was smiling. Daniel Mercer, now a senior graduate student and Klein's other research assistant, watched the attention with a tight jaw. For months, he had been working on his own project, a sophisticated, expensive turbine design backed by simulations and sponsors. At a faculty meeting, Daniel spoke up. "Professor Klein, with respect, the Morales prototype is interesting, but simplistic. It lacks the mathematical foundation of modern aerodynamic design. I'm worried we're celebrating luck, not science." Klein looked at him evenly. "Luck doesn't spend months sketching, testing, and rebuilding after failure," he said. "Luck doesn't stay up all night calculating when no one's watching." Daniel bit his tongue. Still, he said, the data needs to be verified independently. Klein nodded. And it will be. That's how science works. After the meeting, Daniel passed Eli in the hallway without speaking. His silence was heavier than words. The following week, the department announced a presentation for visiting sponsors. 2 projects would be showcased, Daniel's high-tech turbine and Eli's low-cost design. The announcement sent whispers through the halls. Priya warned Eli, "He's going to come for you. Be ready." "I'm not competing," Eli said. "We're trying to solve the same problem." Priya shook her head. "Some people don't see it that way." The presentation day arrived under gray skies. The auditorium buzzed with quiet excitement. Klein stood at the back, arms crossed, eyes calm. Daniel presented first. His slides were sleek, filled with color-coded graphs and animated airflow models. He spoke like someone who knew exactly how smart he sounded. When he finished, the audience applauded politely. Then it was Eli's turn. He stepped onto the stage wearing a borrowed jacket that was a size too big. The projector displayed a simple image of the small turbine turning in a dusty field, a photo he had taken during testing. He began quietly. "I come from a place where light goes out when the wind stops. Our design isn't fancy. It's meant for towns like mine, places that don't have time to wait for perfect solutions." He explained how the blades flexed with the wind instead of resisting it, how the materials were chosen for strength and affordability. He didn't show equations. He showed results. The simplicity of his words carried a strange power. When he finished, the room was silent, not from doubt, but from thought. Then came applause, slow and sincere. Klein smiled, but Daniel's eyes stayed cold. 2 days later, Klein called the team together. "The sponsors were impressed," he said. "They want to fund a field trial of Eli's turbine in New Mexico. If it works, it could lead to full-scale production." The room erupted in congratulations. Priya hugged Eli, but Daniel stood apart. "In New Mexico?" he asked. "That's convenient." Eli frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel crossed his arms. "You're from there. Who's to say the data won't be biased? Who will verify it?" Klein's tone hardened. "Enough, Daniel." But Daniel didn't stop. "Professor, you're risking the lab's reputation on an untested student's idea. He doesn't even have a degree." Eli felt the words land like stones. He wanted to speak, but Klein raised a hand. "If reputation is what you're worried about, Daniel, then remember this. Science has never cared about pedigrees. It cares about truth. Eli's idea will be tested by reality, not rumor." Daniel's face burned red. He left the room without another word. That night, Eli stayed in the lab long after everyone had gone. He walked up to the turbine, now quiet under the fluorescent lights. "Why do people hate what they don't understand?" he whispered. Klein appeared behind him. "They don't hate it," he said. "They fear it. Change is a wind that doesn't ask permission." Eli turned. "I never wanted to be a threat." "You're not," said Klein. "You're a mirror. People see what they could have been if they'd been braver." He paused, his eyes softening. "Pack your things. You and Priya leave for New Mexico next week. You'll lead the field test." Eli blinked. "Me? Lead it?" "You know the design better than anyone," Klein said. "It's time you see it work under the same sky you grew up beneath." That night, Eli called his father. "Pop," he said, "I'm coming home for a while." Raoul's voice cracked with joy. "To stay?" "For work," Eli said. "We're testing the turbine, in our town." The line was quiet for a moment, then Raoul laughed. Your mother would have called that a miracle. Eli smiled. Maybe just good wind. When he hung up, he packed his old notebook, his mother's letter, and the worn work badge that still said Raul Morales. He looked around his small dorm room, the bed, the books, the window overlooking the river, and felt the pull of two worlds again. But this time, he didn't feel torn. He felt like a bridge between them. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and soundless. He watched it drift past the light, and for a moment it looked like dust caught in the wind, like the floor of his old life rising gently to meet the sky. The train from Boston to Albuquerque took 2 days. The farther it moved west, the land flattened, the air dried, and the colors deepened from gray to gold. Eli Morales sat by the window, watching the country widen. The sky seemed to grow larger with every mile. Beside him, Priya slept lightly, her head resting against the glass. Across from them lay a crate holding the new turbine prototype, compact, silver, and silent, wrapped like a secret waiting to breathe. When the train crossed into New Mexico, Eli pressed his palm against the window. The desert rolled out below, vast and familiar. He could almost smell the dry earth, the same dust that once covered his shoes when he walked to school barefoot. Priya stirred awake. "We're close?" "Home," he said quietly. "That's what it used to be." They arrived at a small town south of Albuquerque, a cluster of houses, rusted fences, and one long road that pointed toward the horizon. The community center, once a school gym, would serve as their base. Outside, local volunteers waited, farmers, teenagers, an old mechanic with grease on his hands. Eli introduced himself. Some recognized his last name. One man laughed softly. "Raul's boy? The one who used to fix the pumps with duct tape?" Eli grinned. "Still fixing things. Just smaller pieces now." The crowd welcomed them with cautious pride. That evening, his father arrived in a pickup truck older than Eli himself. The man stepped out slowly, his joints stiff but his smile wide. "You really brought MIT to our backyard," Raul said, hugging his son. "Only a small piece of it," Eli replied. "But it's enough." He turned toward Priya. "This is Priya. She helped me build the turbine." Raul shook her hand. "Thank you for looking after my boy." Priya smiled. "I think he's the one looking after all of us." They began work the next morning. The desert was bright and windless. The sun rose like a white coin over the sand. Together with the volunteers, Eli and Priya built a steel tower beside the old water tank. The turbine fit perfectly on top, its 3 small blades gleaming against the sky. When the final bolt clicked into place, everyone stepped back. Raul wiped his brow. "Looks like a flower," he said. Eli nodded. "Let's hope it grows." They waited. Hours passed. The air was still. The blades hung motionless. "Wind's shy today," Raul said. Priya checked her instruments. "The forecast says gusts by evening." Eli stared at the horizon. "It'll come. It always does." By sunset, the wind began to stir. First a whisper, then a steady breath. The turbine turned once, then again. The blades caught the air, spun faster, and the generator hummed. A small bulb connected to the output flickered, then glowed bright white. The crowd cheered. Children clapped. An old woman crossed herself. For a brief moment, the desert had its own sunrise right there in the evening. Raul's eyes filled. "You did it," he whispered. "You gave light to our home." Eli smiled, though his throat ached. "We did it." For 3 days, the turbine ran perfectly. Data flowed to MIT. Klein sent short messages of encouragement. Steady readings. Excellent work. Proud of you both." But on the fourth night, the wind changed. A storm rolled in from the mountains, dark clouds, heavy air, lightning flashing across the desert like veins of fire. The town had seen storms before, but this one carried an edge of violence. Eli and Priya ran to the site, rain cutting across their faces. The turbine spun faster than it ever had, the blades blurring white against the sky. "The wind speed's too high," Priya shouted. "We have to shut it down." Eli climbed halfway up the tower, his jacket soaked, his hands numb. Lightning flashed close enough to paint the metal blue. He reached the control box, twisting the lock mechanism to engage the brake. The turbine groaned, fighting the storm. For a moment it slowed. Then a sudden gust struck, a monstrous wave of wind. One blade bent, another cracked. Eli heard the scream of metal before the world turned to noise. The turbine tore loose from its mount, spinning wildly before slamming into the sand. The impact threw Eli backward. He hit the ground hard, breath gone, rain hammering his face. Priya ran to him. "Eli, can you hear me?" He nodded weakly. "I'm fine." His arm bled from a shallow cut, his shoulder bruised. But he could still move. They stared at the wreckage. The turbine lay twisted, its blades shattered, its promise scattered across the desert. Eli felt something inside him break with it. "I failed," he whispered. Priya shook her head. "No, the wind failed to be kind. That's all." The next morning, the storm had passed. The town was quiet again. The sky stretched blue and merciless. Raoul found Eli sitting beside the broken turbine, staring at it like a gravestone. "You're hurt," Raoul said. "I'm fine." "You're not." Eli turned. "It's gone, Pop. All of it. Months of work." Raoul sat beside him. "When I was your age, I built a fence that the wind tore down the same week. I cursed it for a month. Then I realized it wasn't the wind's fault. It was mine for thinking fences could hold what's meant to move." Eli looked at him. "So what am I supposed to hold?" Raoul smiled faintly. "The lesson. The rest will rebuild itself." Later that day, Klein called. His voice came through the static of a weak signal. "Are you both safe?" "Yes," Eli said quietly. "The turbine isn't." Klein paused. "I saw the storm reports. Don't let this break you. Every design is a question, not an answer. The next one will speak better." Eli closed his eyes. "It hurts to see it like this." "That's how you know you built it with love," said Klein. That night, the town gathered at the community center. The power was still out, but candles filled the room with warm light. Raoul stood before everyone. "The machine fell," he said, "but it gave us 3 days of light we didn't have before. That's not failure. That's hope." People nodded. Someone began to sing softly, a local hymn about wind and grace. Priya squeezed Eli's hand. "You gave them more than light," she whispered. "You gave them proof that it's possible." Eli looked at the candle flames flickering in the dark. "Then maybe that's enough," he said. Later he walked alone into the night. The broken turbine gleamed faintly under the moon. He picked up one of its shattered blades and ran his fingers along the edge. He whispered to the wind, "You win this round." Then, smiling through tears, he added, "But I'm still here." The breeze shifted, soft and cool, almost like an answer. And as he stood there under the wide desert sky, Eli Morales understood that invention, like life, was not about building things that never break, but about learning how to begin again after they do. The storm had ended, but its memory lingered. The desert smelled of wet dust and burned ozone. Scattered pieces of the turbine lay half buried in the sand, glinting beneath the pale sun. Eli Morales stood quietly beside what remained of his creation. His arm was bandaged, his clothes still stiff from the rain. He had not slept. For 2 days, he had helped the townspeople clear debris and repair roofs. When they asked about rebuilding the turbine, he said only, "Not yet." Priya watched him from a distance. She knew that look, the silence of someone wrestling with meaning. Late that night, when the town had gone still, she joined him outside where the sky stretched endless and full of stars. "Back at MIT," she said softly, "they'll call this a failed experiment." Eli looked up. "Maybe they're right." "No," she said. "Failure is when you stop listening to what it's trying to teach you." He smiled faintly. "Then what's this one saying?" "That it survived long enough to show you where to start next." 2 mornings later, Raoul drove Eli and Priya to the small train station. The platform was empty except for the wind. Eli hugged his father tightly. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Raoul finally said, "You know, when I was young, I thought the world was a wall. You just found the door." Eli blinked back tears. "I didn't find it, Pop. You built it." Raoul laughed softly. "Go finish what you started. I'll keep the wind company till you return." The train whistle blew, long and low, like a blessing. As the cars pulled away, Raoul raised his hand. Eli watched his father shrink into the horizon until he was only a speck of warmth against the endless land. Back in Cambridge, winter returned with a quiet dignity. Building 41 smelled as it always had, metal, oil, and possibility. When Eli and Priya entered the lab, Klein was waiting with 2 cups of coffee. "I'm glad you're both safe," he said. Eli nodded. "The turbine isn't." Klein smiled gently. "Machines can be rebuilt. People are harder." He motioned toward the whiteboard, which was clean except for a single line written in his neat handwriting. "The wind does not fail. It reveals." Eli stood staring at it. "You wrote that for me?" "I wrote it for anyone who's ever believed the world could be better," said Klein. He gestured toward a table covered in new materials, fiberglass sheets, lightweight alloys, and printed circuit boards. "Let's start again," he said. Weeks passed. The lab came alive with sketches, models, and laughter. This time, the new turbine was built not for perfection, but for forgiveness. It would bend more easily under pressure, recover faster after stress, and shut down gracefully when storms grew too strong. Klein called it the Morales model, though Eli objected. "It's everyone's model," he said. "That's what makes the name right," Klein replied. When the prototype was ready, they tested it under simulated winds. It held. They increased the speed. It held again. When the graphs showed steady output, Priya clapped, and Klein simply nodded, his face calm, but his eyes shining. "This one," he said quietly, "will last." Months later, the improved design was shipped back to New Mexico. The whole town gathered to see it raised again on the same hill. Eli watched from a few feet away, heart pounding. When the first gust of wind arrived, the blades turned, not violently but smoothly, as if they had learned how to dance instead of fight. The generator hummed, and the lights in the nearby houses flickered on. The crowd cheered. Raoul, standing beside his son, whispered, "Listen, that's what hope sounds like." Eli nodded. "It sounds like home." Back at MIT, news of the success spread quickly. The turbine became part of a larger project bringing renewable power to remote areas across the country. Eli was offered a permanent research position after graduation. One evening, after the ceremony where he received his degree, he walked alone to the empty lab. The halls were quiet. He set his father's old work badge on the table. next to a photograph of the first turbine. He whispered, "You were right, Mom. The floor does reflect the sky." Later that night, he called his father. Raoul answered, breathless from excitement. "I saw the article," he said. "They're calling you the boy who taught the wind to listen." Eli laughed softly. "The wind never listens. It just answers." Raoul's voice trembled. "You made her proud, son." "I made you proud too, I hope." "You did," Raoul said. "Now come home. There's always more to fix." A month later, Eli returned to New Mexico, this time not as a janitor's son or a student, but as an engineer. He visited the hill where the turbine stood. The blades turned slowly in the warm breeze, quiet and steady, reflecting sunlight like wings. At the base of the tower, children played, their laughter rising into the air. The lights in the town glowed soft and steady, no longer miracles, just part of life. Eli sat on the sand and opened his mother's old letter again. The paper was worn, but the ink still clear. "When the world forgets to see you, don't forget to see yourself. Work quietly. Learn loudly. Forgive faster than others deserve. One day, the floor you clean will reflect the sky." He folded it carefully and placed it back into his pocket. The wind brushed against his face, gentle, familiar, alive. He whispered to it, "I'm still listening." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the turbine kept spinning, steady and graceful. It threw long shadows across the desert, like a signature written in light. And in that quiet hour between day and night, the boy who once cleaned the halls of MIT finally understood. The true measure of genius is not in what you build, but in what you give back. The wind blew once more across the sand, carrying both memory and promise. And somewhere, above the hum of the turbine and the whisper of the desert, it sounded almost like a mother's voice saying, "Well done, my son.